in front of 350 guests. My own brother raised his glass and announced I was nothing more than a lowly security guard. But don't worry, he's harmless. Some stared at me with pity, others with cold disdain, and a few even stepped back as if my presence was contamination. The room erupted in laughter, but that laughter turned to stunned silence when my face appeared on every major news channel that very night. I'm Nathan Cole, and this is the story of how the man they mocked became the man they hold in the highest regard. I stood near the back of the ballroom not by choice, but because it seemed easier than pretending I belonged closer to the front. The chandeliers glittered above, casting sharp gold light over white roses and linen-draped tables. The kind of wedding that screams legacy and wealth and everything I never got. Ethan, my older brother, stood at the center of it all, tuxedo sharp, grinning like a politician. He held Valerie's hand loosely, more for show than affection if you asked me. They looked perfect on paper. In real life, it felt like someone had staged a scene and forgotten to write the heart into it. My mother sat in the corner, tucked far from the head table. She smiled politely at guests who didn't remember her name. My father, of course, sat right up front, beaming at Ethan like he was a goddamn senator. Maybe in Richard Cole's eyes he was. The golden son, the heir, the one who stayed. I don't even know why I came. I hadn't seen most of these people in years, not since I left Austin for Columbus after getting out of the army. They hadn't asked about me then. No calls, no birthdays, not even when I spent 3 weeks in a hospital after a deployment went sideways. I guess when you're not the favored child, your suffering's a footnote at best. A toast began. Ethan clinked his glass, standing confidently in front of the crowd, and launched into his speech. It was the usual performance. How grateful he was, how lucky to have found Valerie, how much their families meant to him. His voice was smooth, practiced, charming, the kind that made people trust you even if they shouldn't. Then he looked my way, right at me. He held his glass up and smiled, too wide to be sincere. And that's my brother Nathan standing in the back there. He's just a security guard, but don't worry, he's harmless. Laughter not loud, but enough to twist something in my gut. Enough to make the corners of mouths turn up around the room. Enough to remind everyone which son mattered and which one didn't. I didn't flinch. I didn't laugh either. I just stood there and took it, because that's what you learn to do in families like mine. You learn to absorb it like impact armor and pretend it didn't bruise. Valerie glanced over, her smile faltering just slightly. For a second, she looked like she might say something like maybe she wasn't expecting Ethan to go that far. But she didn't speak. She just turned back toward the crowd, gripping Ethan's arm a little tighter than before. My hands were in my pockets, fists balled. Not out of anger, not entirely. Just the old habit of grounding myself like I used to do before clearing rooms overseas. Breathe in, breathe out, center. I looked down at the floor-polished marble, catching reflections of everything shiny and expensive in that room. I caught my own distorted reflection, stretched and bent, just a figure in a black suit standing where he didn't belong. My mother glanced my way from across the room, concern flickering behind her glasses. She didn't say anything either, but I knew that look. It was the same one she gave me when my dad missed my high school graduation, or when Ethan crashed my birthday party just to show off his new car. I nodded, once the kind of nod that says I'm fine even when I'm not, and started walking toward the side exit. I didn't need to stay. They had all the photos they needed. I had done my part, showed up, played civil, took the hit. As I passed by the open bar, someone whispered something about uniforms and pay grades. I didn't bother turning around. I knew the tone. I'd heard it before in different accents, in different war zones, people who think they're untouchable until the world reminds them otherwise. Outside, the evening was warm, quiet. The air smelled like champagne and gardenias. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle into my chest. The music inside was muffled now, the laughter a distant echo. They saw a security guard. That's fine. Let them. I lit a cigarette, something I rarely did, but tonight felt like an old habit kind of night. I leaned against the stone wall and watched the lights in the distance flicker like they were winking at me. They had their show. Mine hadn't started yet. I used to think families were supposed to come with guarantees. Love, fairness, someone to catch you when the world let go. But by the time I turned 12, I'd already learned the fine print mattered more than the promises. It was 2008 when my parents split. I remember the silence in the house more than the shouting. That kind of silence that sits in your chest, heavy and full of all the things no one dared to say. My mother packed my things quietly, no tears, just tight movements and lips pressed shut. She let me choose where I wanted to go, but it never really felt like a choice. Ethan stayed with my dad in Austin. Big house, big yard, private school. I moved with my mom to Columbus into a modest 2-bedroom rental with cracked tiles and a water heater that groaned every morning like it was tired of trying. The court said I'd visit my dad every other weekend. At first, I thought that meant something. I imagined he'd be happy to see me, that maybe it'd feel like old times, like the days he used to race me around the park or help me with science projects. But every visit chipped away at that version of him I had in my head. He barely looked up when I walked through the door. Most weekends I'd arrive to find Ethan already sitting on the couch, controller in hand. Dad watching whatever game was on. I'd say hi, maybe get a nod in return. No hug, no welcome. Just a stranger entering someone else's routine. The first few times I tried to bridge the gap, I'd bring drawings from school, talk about soccer practice, mention a book I liked. Dad would grunt or offer a distracted good job. Sometimes he'd compare it to something Ethan did. Usually Ethan came out on top. Once I mentioned I was thinking about joining the baseball team. Dad didn't even look away from the TV when he said Ethan was already varsity. Like that answered everything. Ethan wasn't cruel, not directly, but he knew the power of timing, of tone. He'd wait until Dad stepped out to refill his drink before asking if I was still scared of the dark, or if I'd ever learned to throw a football without flinching. His voice was always light, almost joking, but it cut deep. On one visit, I brought a photo of a birdhouse I helped Mom build. I thought maybe Dad would be impressed. I handed him the photo across the kitchen table. He looked at it, then at me. You used glue for that? Why not use nails like a real build? Before I could answer, Ethan leaned in with that crooked grin. Maybe he was afraid of the hammer. Dad chuckled. Just once, but it stayed in my ears for weeks. That was the visit I stopped bringing things to show. I started packing lighter. Less hope, more silence. Mom never asked about the visits. Maybe she knew. Or maybe she didn't want to pile her worries onto me. At school, I pretended everything was fine. I joked with friends, played video games, got decent grades. But part of me was always split down the middle, like I lived between two houses that both had doors closed in different ways. One Saturday, I sat across from Dad at breakfast. Ethan had gone out early with friends. Dad scrolled through his phone, coffee in one hand. I tried asking if we could go to the batting cages like we used to. He didn't look up. Said he was busy. I asked, busy with what? That time he did look at me. His eyes were tired, like he couldn't believe I needed him to explain. You're not 5 anymore, Nathan. You don't need me to entertain you. I wanted to tell him it wasn't about entertainment, it was about connection. But I knew better than to say that out loud. The next morning, when Mom picked me up, I told her I wasn't feeling well. She glanced at me through the rearview mirror, then said we'd skip the next weekend. Just this once. But once became twice, then a month, then 6. And eventually my weekends in Austin stopped altogether. No one made a fuss. No one called. No one came knocking to ask why I wasn't showing up anymore. I stopped waiting. I threw myself into school and sports. My mom worked long hours but always made time for my games, even if it meant sitting in the freezing cold with a thermos of coffee in her hands. She was present, always. That mattered more than she knew. Years later, I'd look back and realize those weekends shaped me more than the years that followed. Not because of what they gave me, but because of what they didn't. They taught me silence can speak louder than hate, that neglect carves deeper than insult, and that sometimes the hardest part isn't being hurt. It's realizing the people you wanted to love, you never knew how. The lights from the ballroom spilled faintly into the night, but I didn't look back. The cigarette in my hand had burned halfway down, forgotten. I flicked the ash, crushed it out on the stone, and slid it into the nearest trash bin. No trace, no smoke, no scent left behind. Behind me, the music picked up again. A slow, romantic number, the kind they'd remember for anniversaries. I walked down the back steps and toward the parking lot. My mother's car was parked 3 rows over. She had offered to stay until the end, but I told her not to wait. I didn't need a ride, I just needed air. There was still time before this night ended, still pieces moving behind curtains. And somewhere in that crowd of smiles and speeches, something wasn't quite right. It was the summer after high school when I told my dad I wanted to apply to West Point. I still remember the way he looked at me like I'd just said I wanted to become a magician or join a circus. He didn't laugh, but something in his eyes curled with quiet disbelief. "That's not for you, Nathan. You're not built for that kind of life. Your brother, maybe, not you." I had the grades, the fitness, even a letter from my high school principal who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. What I didn't have was my father's support, and without his signature, the application stalled before it ever reached the right hands. He never told me no directly. Just kept finding ways to delay it, to question it. He said it was too expensive, that I wouldn't last. That the Army wasn't looking for soft-spoken kids from Columbus who hadn't even learned to lead their own shadows. Eventually, the silence around the topic became a wall I couldn't climb over. I didn't argue. I just looked up alternatives, quietly, purposefully. That fall I enlisted, not the academy, not officer school, just the real thing, basic at Fort Benning, Georgia. A decision made without a single conversation with my father. My mom didn't try to stop me. She packed my bags, wrote a letter I kept in my wallet, and told me to come back whole. Fort Benning was hell. Humid air that clung to your lungs, sand in your teeth, boots that never dried. The days blurred into drills, orders, and bruises, and I loved it. Not because I enjoyed the pain, but because for the first time in my life, every inch of progress was mine. No favoritism, no family name, just effort, sweat, and resolve. I made it through the initial 14 weeks with a stress fracture in my left foot I never reported. I learned to shoot, to fight, to lead under pressure. I learned how to sleep for 4 hours and function like it was 8. I learned how to carry 30 pounds of gear on my back and still run toward gunfire instead of away from it, somewhere between the 2 a.m. fire drills and the tear gas chamber. I stopped hearing my father's voice in my head, the one that whispered I wasn't enough. It got drowned out by something stronger, something mine. They offered me a slot in a specialized security unit attached to a logistics team headed for deployment. I didn't ask questions. I signed. Over the next 4 years, I rotated between overseas assignments and domestic operations. Places I can't name, faces I never saw again. I wasn't a hero, but I became someone I could respect in the mirror. My last deployment ended in 2019. 2 weeks later, I stood at the airport in Columbus with a duffel bag full of memories and scars I didn't want anyone to see. I hugged my mom. She cried in that quiet way of hers, like rain falling without thunder. I never told her everything, just enough to make her proud, just enough to keep her from worrying. I never told my father anything. I didn't give him my address, didn't show up at Thanksgiving. When Ethan called once, probably out of some brief family obligation, I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it later. He didn't say much, just asked if I was still doing the soldier thing and said something about a new investment he was excited about. I deleted the message before it finished. After the Army, I took a job in private security, not the kind with pressed suits and earpieces guarding celebrities. The real kind, high-risk asset protection event security planning threat assessment for corporate facilities. Quiet work, serious work, work that kept me moving. I kept my military record close to the chest. Most clients didn't need to know. Most people just assumed I was another guy in a uniform who knew how to stand still for long periods. That was fine with me. The less they assumed, the more leverage I kept. When people asked, I said I worked security, period. No war stories, no medals. Just a guy who showed up on time and did the job right. I rented a small place in Clintonville, a quiet corner north of downtown Columbus. I bought a dog, German Shepherd, loyal, simple. I called him Knox. Nights were quiet, mornings were early. I went running in the dark and cooked meals that no one but me would eat. Sometimes I sat on the porch and watched cars pass, wondering if any of them were headed towards something better. Sometimes I told myself I was already there. I didn't miss the Army. I missed the clarity, the simplicity of knowing who had your back and who didn't. Civilian life had more masks, more performance. Still, I stayed sharp, trained at the range, ran drills in my backyard with Knox. It wasn't paranoia, it was habit. A way to keep the silence from getting too loud. The invitations to family events came less and less. Birthdays, holidays. Eventually, nothing. It didn't sting like I thought it would. It just confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't part of that picture anymore. And I was okay with that. Until the wedding invitation came, printed in gold foil, hand-delivered. Addressed to Nathan Cole, no rank, no title. I held it in my hand for a long time, wondering if they remembered who they had sent it to. Wondering if maybe someone had changed. Then I read the RSVP, the line where I was supposed to write my name and meal preference. I checked yes, wrote in chicken, and folded the card back into the envelope like it didn't mean anything at all. Ethan was always good at looking successful. Crisp suits, $1,000 watches, the right words at the right times. He had the smile of a politician and the timing of a magician, always pulling something shiny out of nowhere while people applauded, without noticing what had disappeared. He went to Ridgewell University, one of those private schools with ivy-covered walls and too many buildings named after oil executives. Dad paid every cent, of course. Full tuition, a car, off-campus condo, all expenses covered. Ethan studied business, or so they said, but I'm not sure he ever actually planned to graduate. He was there to network, to party, to build whatever reputation he thought he needed. After college, he launched a string of ventures that sounded impressive if you didn't ask too many questions. A startup consulting firm that never listed a single client. A clothing brand that existed mostly on Instagram. And then there was the restaurant. Austin. He pitched it as a high-end gastro experience with local Texas fusion. The kind of place where entrees had names like deconstructed brisket foam and the cocktails came with a spoken word pairing. He brought in investors, mostly family friends, and bored dentists looking for something cool to brag about. The buy-in started at $20,000. Ethan promised returns within 18 months. 6 months later, the location was still under construction, the contractor had quit, and the permits were in limbo. Rumors started swirling. Equipment invoices unpaid, supplier checks bouncing. A few of the investors got nervous and called their lawyers. That's when the police started poking around. Officially, no charges were filed. Unofficially, word got around that Ethan had used a chunk of the investor money to buy a Tesla and finance a 3-week trip to Ibiza. He claimed it was all part of a marketing strategy, strategic branding, he called it. My dad called it a smear campaign. What happened next was textbook Richard Cole. A couple of news outlets were prepping to run stories. One local blog even teased an expose about the ghost restaurant scandal. But then silence. The pieces never ran. The blog went offline for 2 weeks. When it came back, the article was gone. Dad always had connections in media. His real estate firm spent hundreds of thousands every year on advertising. A quiet donation here, a call to a station manager there, and suddenly no one was talking about Ethan anymore. The investors got partial refunds, signed NDAs, and the whole thing vanished like smoke. I didn't hear about any of it until months later. I was grabbing a drink with Brian, an old high school friend who now worked as a municipal inspector in Austin. We hadn't seen each other in years, but he recognized me at the bar and struck up a conversation. After a few beers, he leaned in and said he'd been assigned to a property linked to Ethan's name. Said the paperwork was a mess and that the whole thing had stunk from the beginning. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, "but your brother almost got roasted. Someone higher up shut it down hard." I didn't say much, just nodded, finished my drink, and walked out into the night with that old familiar weight pressing against my ribs. They hadn't told me a word. No heads up, no warning, not even a family group chat message saying, "Hey, your brother's in some trouble. Be careful what you say." It wasn't that I wanted to be included, but I didn't expect to be left that far out. To them, I was furniture, something in the background, present but not important. That silence echoed louder than any scandal. A week later, I saw Ethan's name trending again. Not for the restaurant, of course. That had been scrubbed clean. This time it was because he'd gotten engaged to Valerie Sinclair, the daughter of a city councilman. The photo was all over Austin Lifestyle Weekly. Him in a suit, her in a white dress on a rooftop with string lights. The caption read, "Power couple Ethan Cole and Valerie Sinclair set the date." I stared at the screen for a long time, then clicked away. I didn't care who he was marrying. I just kept thinking about how a man who nearly scammed half a dozen investors could land on his feet so easily without ever having to say sorry, without ever being held accountable. I thought about Dad, too. How many strings he'd had to pull, how many calls, how much money, all to keep the golden sun untarnished. Maybe that was the difference between us. Ethan could fall and be caught. I had to build my own parachute. The day after the wedding invite came, I called my boss at Helix Security. Told him I needed a few days off in May, no questions asked. He approved it immediately. I didn't explain why, didn't mention the name Ethan, didn't say wedding or family or Austin. I just said I had something to attend to. Then I hung up and sat there in the quiet, wondering if this was going to be the time everything cracked wide open. Or if once again I'd be the only one standing in the debris. The rehearsal dinner was held at a country club tucked into the hills west of Austin. The kind of place where valet drivers wore earpieces and the grass looked like it had never been walked on. I parked 2 blocks away and walked not because I had to, but because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing my name written on a parking list. Inside the room was all candlelight and polished wood, full of the kind of laughter that didn't reach the eyes. My mother was already seated at a table near the edge of the room. She smiled when she saw me the way she always did, small and true like a lighthouse. I walked over and kissed her cheek. Her hands were cold. "You okay?" I asked. "Better now," she said. Then I heard it, my father's voice. "Nathan's here." He turned slightly, his expression halfway between acknowledgement and obligation. He didn't stand up. "Richard," my mother said with a nod. "Nathan," he said, looking past me like I was someone he once remembered from a meeting. "You made it. Good. That was it. No handshake, no how have you been, just good." Ethan appeared seconds later. He walked up like he was glad to see me, arms out. A smile painted carefully onto his face. His suit was tailored within an inch of its life, dark navy with subtle pinstripes. I could smell expensive cologne and something synthetic underneath like performance. "Nate, my man," he said. "Long time. You look lean." "Guess work does that to you," I said. "Work, huh? Still doing the security gig?" he asked, tone light but sharp at the edges. "What is it now? Parking garages or grocery stores must be steady enough." "Pays the bills, right?" I smiled. That kind of smile that doesn't go anywhere near your eyes. "Pays the bills," I said, and then some. He laughed like I was joking, clapped me on the shoulder too hard. "You always had that quiet vibe. Mysterious. I bet the old ladies love it." He turned to the group forming behind him, mostly his fiancée's family. They were all perfectly dressed like extras from a political ad. Ethan lowered his voice just enough for me to hear, but not enough for it to seem pointed. "He's the real deal, y'all. Just a security guy. Keeps things safe. No need to worry around this one." I felt the heat rise in my ears, not from embarrassment, from restraint. But I said nothing. Just tucked my hands into my pockets and nodded. "That's right," I said. "Someone's got to keep an eye on things." Valerie approached a moment later, breaking the tension like fog rolling through heat. She wore a soft blue dress, hair swept back, eyes scanning me with more calculation than kindness, but not cold, more curious. "Nathan," she said, "I've heard a lot about you. It's nice you could come." "Likewise," I said. "Congratulations." "Thanks." Her smile was polite, but her gaze lingered, like she was searching for something beneath the surface. She looked to Ethan, then to me again. "You served right, Army?" "Yeah," I said, "a while ago." She nodded slowly. "That's admirable." Ethan cleared his throat and slipped an arm around her waist. Valerie turned slightly toward him, but her eyes didn't leave mine right away. People started drifting toward their seats, servers offering glasses of wine and platters of roasted figs. I made my way to the edge of the room, a safe zone near the wall, close enough to observe but far enough to be ignored. My father never came to sit beside me. He stayed by Ethan, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, shaking hands like he was up for election. My mother joined me halfway through the meal. "You don't have to stay for the whole thing," she said gently. "I'm fine," I replied. "I'm serious. If it gets to be too much, just slip out." "No one will notice." "They already didn't," I said. "But I'm staying." She reached out and touched my hand. I forgot how small hers felt. "You know, when you were little, you used to line up your action figures like soldiers. I asked you once what they were doing. You said they were waiting for orders." I smiled. "I don't remember that. I do." We sat quietly for a while, letting the noise blur around us. The clinking of glasses, the hum of surface-level conversations. Ethan made another toast. Everyone clapped. Valerie smiled on cue. My father's face glowed with pride, the kind you save for investments that finally start paying off. I didn't applaud. I watched. Ethan met my eyes once. Just once. There was something flickering in his expression. Confidence, maybe. Or the anticipation of a punchline he thought I hadn't caught yet. Let him have it, I thought. Let them all have it. There was still a whole wedding ahead. Plenty of time for the punchline to turn into something else entirely. The ballroom shimmered with polished luxury, every detail curated like it had something to prove. White orchids climbed the golden arches above the tables. Candlelight danced in tall glass holders, casting soft halos around crystal stemware. It was the kind of wedding people posted about with envy, not knowing how much of it was smoke and mirrors. I walked in alone, without fanfare. No +1, no name card on the head tables. Just me tucked away at the edge of the guest list, sitting at a table near the exit where the waitstaff passed often enough to make conversation impossible. The ceremony had ended 30 minutes earlier in the courtyard, beneath a stone arch wrapped in silk and blooms. Vows were exchanged, rings, applause. Now everyone was inside for the reception, basking in a curated kind of joy, all smiles and champagne. My father stood near the head table, already half a glass in. He wore pride like a tailored jacket, beaming as if the empire he'd dreamed of had finally crowned its prince. Ethan sat beside Valerie, arm draped over the back of her chair, like he'd claimed her as one more asset in a long list. A few minutes into the meal, silverware quieted as my father tapped his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention." He held the mic like he'd done it 100 times. Voice practiced, full of that effortless charm that had once sold condos faster than blueprints could be printed. Tonight I speak not just as a father, but as a man who has watched his son grow into something remarkable. Ethan is the future of this family. A leader, a visionary, someone who has taken every challenge life handed him and turned it into opportunity. He raised his glass. To Ethan and Valerie, may your life together be as extraordinary as tonight. Applause rang out. People stood. Toasts were shouted from across the room. I stayed seated. Then Ethan stood, flashing that same polished grin. He took the mic with a flourish, thanking everyone with the smooth rhythm of a man used to being admired. His speech was peppered with just the right balance of humility and flair. Valerie smiled at him, eyes tight at the corners. And of course, Ethan continued, "I want to give a quick shout out to my little brother Nathan. He made the trip all the way from Ohio just for this. It means a lot, man." He turned slightly toward my table. The spotlight didn't follow, but eyes did. "Nathan works in security now, a real boots-on-the-ground kind of guy. If you see him tonight looking extra serious, don't worry. That's just him doing what he does best." There were laughs, light at first, then louder. One of Ethan's college buddies added, "So we've got free security tonight. That's a bonus." Someone else clinked their glass and shouted, "Watch out, Nate's gonna frisk the cake." Even the DJ chuckled. I stayed still. Let it pass, let it all pass. Then a man I didn't recognize turned to the table beside him and said, "I thought he was one of the hotel guys. Didn't know he was family." A woman in a red dress let out a surprised laugh, then lowered her voice and said something that made the people beside her smile like they'd gotten away with a good insult. I stood to refill my drink. As I passed a group near the bar, someone stepped aside, barely noticeable, just half a foot back. But the message was clear, like my presence might lower the tone of her evening. I walked slowly, deliberately. No hurry, no words. Just a quiet shadow cutting through a room built to forget I ever existed. Valerie saw it. She didn't laugh. She didn't speak. Her hands folded neatly in her lap, but her head dipped slightly as if ashamed. She looked at me with something between apology and pity. I didn't want either. My father didn't glance my way once. He raised his glass again and leaned in close to Ethan, whispering something that made him laugh through his nose. The sound grated, too clean, too rehearsed. I reached the edge of the ballroom and stepped out onto the terrace. The doors closed behind me, muffling the music and voices like a curtain dropping at the end of a play. Outside, the evening air cooled my skin. The stars above Austin barely broke through the city's glow, but they were there if you looked hard enough. I walked to the edge of the balcony, leaned on the stone railing, and let the silence settle around me. In the distance, car horns echoed off high-rises. Somewhere below, laughter rose from another party. I lit a cigarette even though I'd told myself I was done with them. Smoke curled in the air like a thread untangling itself. I watched it rise, watched it vanish. Every insult, every dismissal, every reminder of my place. All of it stacked up like bricks. And I wasn't angry, not in the explosive way people imagined. I was tired. Tired of being treated like I had earned my distance from them, like I'd asked to be lesser. A door opened behind me. Footsteps hesitant. Valerie. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, not too close. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For what? You know what?" I looked at her, really looked, the way her jaw clenched, the way her fingers twisted the fabric of her dress near the hem. "It's his way of coping," she said. "He makes jokes when he's nervous." "He wasn't nervous," I said. She nodded, almost like she agreed but couldn't say it out loud. "He's proud of you, you know, in his own way." I smiled, slow and dry. "No, he's proud that I stayed small, that I didn't outshine him, that I'm the punchline, not the problem." She didn't argue, just stood there with me in the silence. After a moment, she asked, "Why did you come?" I didn't answer right away. "Because sometimes you have to show up, even if they don't want you there, even if they pretend you're invisible." She nodded, and maybe because I wanted to see if anything had changed, and I dropped the cigarette, ground it out with my heel. It hasn't. She stayed behind as I walked down the terrace steps, back into the quiet, into the shadows where no one was watching, where I could finally breathe. Under the soft terrace lights, I took one last breath and turned back toward the building. I wasn't ready to head into the ballroom again, but I didn't want to linger in limbo either. So I walked the edge of the grounds, keeping close to the shadows that wrapped around the all-stone grand's stone pillars and manicured hedges. From a distance, the ballroom glowed warm and golden, music drifting in waves. Everything looked as perfect as money could buy, but habits formed in combat never leave. I kept scanning. People, movements, posture, eyes. That's when I saw the first one. A server carrying an empty tray stepped into the hallway leading toward the staff-only wing. Nothing unusual except he glanced over his shoulder twice, once at the ballroom, once into the hallway, and quickened his pace. I watched for a few seconds, then saw two more. Different uniforms, not the ones I'd seen earlier. Too plain, no logos, shoes too new. Moving together, then splitting apart like they didn't want to be associated. I knew how real servers moved. Casual, fluid, confident in the space. These three were too alert, too rehearsed. I followed slowly, not enough to draw attention, just enough to track. When I turned into the hallway, one of them, tall-built, mid-30s, was just disappearing through the kitchen service door. He looked back. Eyes met mine. That kind of look that calculates. Recognition. Assessment. He didn't panic, just slipped inside, cool and smooth. I stood still for a moment, then walked casually past the kitchen entrance toward a security panel half hidden near the elevators. No one noticed me. I didn't expect they would. My suit was just bland enough, my face just familiar enough to blend into a wedding crowd. I tapped into the security panel and scanned the internal feeds. Two angles of the service hallway. One showed the kitchen, another showed a corridor behind the storage rooms. 3 men, 2 regrouped by a steel door marked electrical access. One stood watch near the loading dock, fingers brushing his ear in a rhythm that didn't match adjusting an earpiece. That was code, short-range comms. The ballroom's private staff was contracted from a vetted company I was familiar with. I'd worked weddings here before. All personnel were required to check in at a designated staff entrance, monitored by 2 guards and a facial recognition tablet. No one got past that without clearance, and these 3 weren't on any of the approved rosters. I stepped back from the panel and moved quickly, blending with a passing group of guests heading to the restroom wing. Near the lobby, I saw Jenna, the front desk manager. Calm, unbothered, always discreet. I approached from the side, just slow enough to keep it casual. "Can I get a glass of water at the bar?" I asked, slipping a small card into her hand. She didn't look at it, just nodded once and moved away like she'd heard nothing strange. The card had one word: breach. I circled back toward the ballroom. The music had shifted again. People were starting to dance. Lights had dimmed just enough to cover the tension already building in my gut. I scanned the floor quickly. Valerie was talking to her father. Ethan was holding court near the open bar, laughing too loudly. My father was talking to a group of attorneys. None of them had a clue. Inside my jacket, I had a small earbud. Not regulation anymore, but a leftover habit from private contracts. I slipped it in as I moved toward the side hallway again, catching the faint static of local emergency channels. Nothing yet, but that wouldn't last long. I found a vantage point where I could see the loading dock through a narrow window. One of the men was speaking into a lapel mic now. No tray, no drink orders, just pacing, watching. Inside my head, the years of training clicked into place like muscle memory. 3 unidentified individuals with coordinated behavior. Unusual access, clear use of communication gear, positioned across strategic service zones of a high-profile event. Best case scenario, stupid stunt. Worst case, coordinated incursion. Armed or not, the outcome could spiral fast. I kept my hands visible. Didn't reach for anything. No sudden movements. Just observed. Tracked. Behind me, a soft tone buzzed in the earbud. Jenna's signal. I keyed the mic sewn into my collar. 1 nod if they're responding. 2 if I escalate. She passed me in the hallway without pausing. 2 nods. No backup yet. Whatever this was, I'd be the first line. And I was already too close to walk away. On my way back toward the ballroom entrance, I spotted Dale. Tall, stocky buzz cut. Looked like any off-duty cousin from out of town, except for the eyes, always moving, always calculating. He was standing near the appetizer station, pretending to inspect a tray of shrimp cocktail, while his fingers casually adjusted the cuff of his shirt. I moved past him slow, just brushing his shoulder. 3. Loading dock hallway east corridor. Headsets no clearance. He didn't nod, didn't blink. Just murmured into his drink napkin. "Got it. You take east. I'll cover back storage." We split without fanfare. I headed toward the main corridor, weaving past tables, champagne flutes. The oblivious laughter of people too deep into a perfect night to notice the air had shifted. The first suspect was circling the champagne bar, walking in a wide pattern that passed too close to the wall twice. A server bumped him and he didn't flinch. No apology, no adjustment. That kind of tension sits under the skin. I positioned myself near the corner. The music drowned most conversations, so I didn't need to whisper. Eyes on 1. East bar. Approaching now. My left hand hovered just inside my blazer. I didn't have a weapon, didn't need one. Sometimes leverage was a stance, not steel. He turned his back to me, scanned the room, then raised his wrist to his mouth. That's when I moved. A hard grip on his forearm, twisted, wrist locked and angled down, pressure just enough to make him drop the tiny earpiece into his drink. "You're not on the guest list," I said low. "So why don't we step out?" He started to resist, but I shifted my weight, pushed his arm just far enough that he froze. I'm not going to repeat myself. The bartender saw us but didn't intervene. I moved the man toward the staff hallway like we were two co-workers settling a dispute. At the corner, Dale appeared from the opposite end. He gave a single blink signal clear. "That's one," he whispered back. "Storage room's locked. Other two regrouping. We need to split them before they converge." I pushed the first guy into a utility closet and locked the door from outside. "Temporary but enough. I'll handle the second. Take main hall and cut off back access. On it." I slipped through the side corridor, careful not to draw attention. The second suspect had left the loading dock and was now approaching the double doors to the main ballroom. Dressed in a crisp shirt vest, too clean for a real waiter. He was brushing past guests, eyeing the podium where wedding gifts were piled. He reached into his jacket, slow, deliberate. I closed the distance fast, grabbed his shoulder from behind and yanked him half a step back into the archway behind the ice sculpture table. "Hey man, what the hell?" he started. I shoved him against the wall. My hand closed on his wrist as I pried the object free. Phone, but not a normal one. Custom interface, military base encrypt. "What's your mission?" I asked quietly. He smiled like a man who thought he still had time. Too late to stop it. I slammed the phone against the wall, pieces scattered. He lunged, but I sidestepped, used his momentum to drop him to one knee and pin him with my weight. "Two down," I murmured into my comm. Dale responded. "Third's in the bridal suite hallway, maybe armed. Going in now. Hold until I'm clear." I zip-tied the second suspect's wrists with a pair I pulled from my pocket, then dragged him behind the curtain near the utility corridor. I'd seen enough weddings ruined by chaos. This one didn't need a public takedown yet. "Moving now," I said. I passed Ethan on my way back. He was laughing with two uncles, clearly riding high. He didn't see me, didn't care. Still thought the only threat to his night was overcooked steak. But in the far hall, trouble was tightening its grip. And we were just getting started. The ballroom was holding its breath. Music still played from the speakers, but no one was listening. A subtle change had crept in, eyes watching, backs tightening, instinct sensing something was off, even if the brain hadn't caught up yet. Near the gift table, a man in a waiter's uniform stepped into view. His stride was slower now, purposeful. He moved toward the center of the room, hands low, body stiff, and for a brief second I thought he might just walk out, blend in, disappear. Then he stopped cold, pulled something from under his tray and raised it. The click of a safety being released echoed louder than the music. "Everyone down. This is a robbery, nobody move." The screaming started instantly. People shoved back their chairs, glass shattered under feet. Someone knocked over the champagne tower. A toddler cried from under a table where a woman had thrown herself on top of him. It was chaos, loud and instant. I didn't move at first, my whole body locked into training. Breathing slowed. I focused only on him. Gun hand was steady. He wasn't new. He knew what he was doing. His eyes scanned corners. He was reading threats. He didn't see me yet. 30 feet out. He waved the pistol toward the center of the room. "You in the black dress, put the phone down. I swear I will shoot." Dale's voice crackled quietly through my earpiece. "Got eyes on him. Far west side. No clean shot. You too close." "I'm going." I slipped behind the closest table, used the overturned ice sculpture as partial cover, and crawled toward the buffet. The shooter was pacing now, trying to cover too much ground. He hadn't noticed me. 20 feet. I passed a crouched groomsman who looked at me wide-eyed. I raised a finger to my lips and kept moving. The smell of broken glass and spilled liquor filled the air. The shooter barked another command. Wallets, phones, jewelry. Dump them on the floor. "Move now." Guests began tossing purses, phones, watches onto the ground. One man hesitated and got a pistol waved in his face. I'm not here to play games 15 feet now. I crouched low, ready to spring. One more step and I'd have the angle. Then a scream to my left, Valerie. She had stood, maybe to help, maybe out of instinct. The shooter saw her. His arm twitched. That was it. I moved fast and hard, clearing the distance in 3 long strides. I launched myself forward, tackling him from behind. We hit the floor hard. His gun clattered away, skidding under a nearby table. He fought like hell. Elbows, knees, twisting his body to reach his backup piece, hidden, maybe taped behind his belt. I slammed his hand down once, twice. He hissed through his teeth, tried to roll. Not today. I drove my weight into him, wrapped his arm twisted, and pinned him face first into the tile. Dale was suddenly there beside me, weapon drawn. Weapon clear, suspect down, room security set into his comms. Guests peeked up from behind tables. One woman sobbed loudly. A young boy pointed at me and whispered something to his dad. I could see cell phones up recording. Valerie stood motionless in the center of the dance floor. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were fixed on me like I was someone she had never met before. I stood slowly, chest heaving. Blood pounded in my ears, but everything else was still. The shooter groaned under Dale's knee, coughing against the floor. Outside, sirens finally echoed closer. The first officer through the door paused at the scene. She looked at me, then at Dale, then moved to cuff the suspect. "EMS is on the way," she called out. People were starting to stand now. Whispers passed quickly. Faces stared at me, some in awe, others in disbelief. A voice cut through. "He saved us," another guest added. "That guy, he took him down with his bare hands." The room filled with murmurs. Valerie walked up to me slowly. Her eyes welled, voice trembling. "You were just so calm." I said nothing. My pulse hadn't slowed. I didn't know she said, tears now slipping down her cheeks. "Of course you didn't." Ethan finally emerged from behind the dessert table. He looked dazed, his suit wrinkled, a smear of cake on one sleeve. He looked at Valerie, then at me, and finally around at the crowd, now whispering, pointing. He didn't say a word. His father came next, mouth open, eyes wide. He looked like he'd swallowed glass. Security footage would later show the entire takedown. So would 3 separate guest videos. Local news picked it up by the 10 o'clock broadcast. A wedding hero headline said, "Former Army vet saves dozens in hotel standoff." But in that moment, I wasn't thinking of any of that. I just stared at Ethan, and for the first time in my life, he looked small. I didn't sleep much that night. The adrenaline wouldn't leave. My phone buzzed every few minutes, even on silent. Missed calls, messages from numbers I didn't recognize. At some point, I shut it off and just sat in the dark. By morning, the world had changed. The first headline came from a local Austin news station. "Veteran security guard stops wedding robbery in dramatic takedown." Then Fox picked it up. "Former Army sergeant prevents mass panic at Texas wedding." By 10 a.m., it was everywhere. A still shot from the hotel's security footage showed me with my knee in the robber's back, arms tight around his wrist. The angle caught my face, half in shadow, jaw clenched. It looked cinematic, intentional, like I'd been waiting my whole life for that shot. But that wasn't what really lit the fire. It was the TikTok clip. Someone, probably a guest, had recorded Ethan during his speech at the rehearsal dinner the night before. The part where he gestured toward me, drink in hand. Smug smee plastered across his face. "Oh, that's just my little brother. He's a security guard, doesn't do much. You know, keeps parking lots safe." Laughter. Then the next video started. The takedown, me diving across the ballroom, Valerie screaming, the gun hitting the floor, side by side, 2 different Nathans, one ignored, one undeniable. The caption read, "The man you mocked just saved your life." Within 24 hours, the clip hit 6.2 million views. Security guard hero trended in all 50 states. People stitched it with stories of their own quiet siblings, their underappreciated cousins, their protective fathers. The narrative had a life of its own. I got a text from Jenna, the front desk manager from the hotel. "Dude, you're famous." Then one from Carter, an old army buddy I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. "Knew you'd end up on the news someday, just didn't think it'd be in a tux." Then came the phone call. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number, but something in me said yes. "This is Captain Torres," the voice said, clipped and clear. "You probably don't remember me. Fort Benning, 2014. You were under my command." I stood up straight without realizing. "Sir, at ease, son. You were damn impressive last night." "Thank you, sir. I've already spoken to a few media outlets." "Verified your record. Bronze Star, 2 tours, no reprimands. The works. They know who you are now. I don't need press, I know. But you earned it, and this country needs stories like yours." When the call ended, I stared at the wall for a long time. Somewhere in the noise of notifications, I saw a link from YouTube. A podcast segment titled "The Arrogant Groom and the Silent Hero." Whoa, this story matters in it. A commentator dissected Ethan's speech and compared it to the footage from the ballroom. Called it a case study in karma. Used the phrase "poetic justice" 3 times in 5 minutes. Valerie called that afternoon. I didn't pick up the first time, or the second. On the third, I answered. She didn't say hello. "I didn't know he said that about you," she began. "I believe you." She paused. "You were calm, you were brave." I don't even know what to say. "You don't have to. He's not who I thought he was." I didn't respond. Some things didn't need words. The internet kept going. Articles were written, podcasts debated the family dynamics. Reddit threads speculated whether Ethan would apologize or double down. He did neither, but someone else did. That evening, a letter showed up at my apartment, hand-delivered, plain white envelope, my name in block letters, inside a single sheet. "Nathan, I was wrong. About everything. Dad. No flourish, no excuses, just that, and it hit harder than any speech could have." I folded it back into the envelope and set it on the counter. Outside, the city moved on, but everything inside had shifted. I packed light. Just one bag. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving Austin, not even Dale. No announcement, no goodbye post. Just a quiet morning, a one-way ticket, and the road back to Columbus. The air smelled different when I stepped out of the Greyhound. Quieter, softer, like time moved slower here. Mom opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes went wide, then wet. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around me and held on like she was afraid I might vanish again. "You didn't have to come," she whispered into my shoulder. I wanted to. We sat in the kitchen, same yellow tile floor I remembered, same humming fridge with the dent from when I was 14 and dropped a bowling ball on my foot. She poured coffee. "Still 2 sugars, no cream, just the way I liked it." "They're saying all kinds of things on the news," she said. "I know. People stopping by, neighbors, strangers. I told Mrs. Keller you saved a wedding and she cried for 15 minutes. I chuckled softly. Then she handed me an envelope. "This came for you yesterday." The handwriting was unfamiliar. Neat. Careful. I opened it slowly. "Nathan, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but I need to say it anyway. I didn't know. Not the real you. Not what you'd lived. I laughed when he said those things about you, and I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. If I had known who you really were, maybe I would have looked at you differently. Maybe I wouldn't have smiled while you stood alone. Thank you for what you did, for who you are. Valerie, I didn't fold it, just set it face down on the counter and stared out the window. That afternoon I got a message request, unknown number. But the initials in the preview said everything. Ethan. It was long. Apologies. Explanations. A few links to press interviews he'd given where he tried to spin the narrative, tried to reclaim his image. I read the first 2 lines, then I blocked the number. I went out that evening to grab a few things from the grocery store. Same place I'd biked to as a kid. They'd renovated it since, but the bones were the same. The freezer still clicked when you stepped past the orange juice. As I walked toward the checkout, I heard a whisper. Dad, that's him. The guy from the news. A boy maybe 11 tugged on his father's coat, his eyes wide. Not afraid, just amazed. The man looked at me, nodded once. Respect in the smallest gesture. I nodded back. Outside, the sky was pink with early dusk. A breeze carried leaves across the pavement. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. But I felt known, and maybe for the first time that was enough. The days passed quietly after that. No more headlines, no new messages. The world, as it always does, moved on. I went back to work, just regular shifts at the university security desk, monitoring halls, checking IDs, locking up at night. No more cameras pointed at me. No whispers in the grocery line. Sometimes students would glance twice. A few professors nodded politely. One time someone left a sticky note on my locker. Thanks for watching out for us. It didn't have a name. I didn't need one. Life went on. But something inside had shifted for good. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet click like a door finally closing. I thought a lot about what happened. Not just the wedding or the robbery or the headlines, but everything before it. The years I spent being told I wasn't enough, that I didn't matter, that someone else would always be better. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I never needed to prove anything in the first place. I saw Valerie once more, months later. At a fundraiser downtown. She walked up slowly, offered a genuine smile. There was no guilt in her eyes anymore, just something quieter, understanding. She said she was doing well, that she'd started volunteering with a local nonprofit, that she still thought about that night, and about the letter she wrote. I told her I kept it. She said thank you. Then we walked separate ways. Ethan never reached out again. Neither did my father. And that was okay. Not everything needs a reunion. Not every story ends with reconciliation. Sometimes the distance is the healing. People still ask sometimes, why didn't you say something before the wedding? Why didn't you tell them what you'd done, who you were? Because it wasn't about the uniform, or the medal, or the title. It never was. I was a protector, always had been, not just of people, but of dignity, of truth, of what's right, even when no one's watching. And yes, I'm a security guard. I've walked parking lots at midnight, checked back doors and turned off alarms. I've helped lost freshmen find their dorms, sat with crying students who were too afraid to go back to their rooms. I'm still that. The only difference now is when people say my name, it's not followed by a smirk. It's not the job title that defines you. It's what you choose to protect. So yes, I'm just a security guard. Only this time they know what I'm guarding. And I wouldn't change a thing. You don't need to shout to be seen. You don't need to fight for a spotlight. Sometimes all you need is to stand your ground and let your actions speak. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been dismissed, laughed at, told you weren't enough, your story matters. Tell it to me.